Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's online NIAS talk called Experiencing Art in Pandemic Times. This is a very special talk, I think, because art and science really come together. My name is Zara Kars. I am program maker at NIAS and I will be your moderator tonight. Let me briefly explain what NIAS is before we continue to the program. NIAS is the Netherlands Institute for Advanced Study, a research institute in Amsterdam where we host about 60 fellows a year. There are international researchers, artists, journalists, and writers, all working on their own interdisciplinary and curiosity-driven research projects. And tonight, one of them is here with us, Manuela Ciotti. You already see her on the screen. Before I introduce her a little bit more and the other panelists with us tonight, let me say a little bit about the program. We will reflect tonight on how the art world, art institutions like museums or galleries, but also individual artists or curators have responded to the worldwide closing of physical art spaces due to the pandemic. Until recently, most of us experienced that art as something in physical spaces. And together with three wonderful speakers, we will explore if and how the art world is transforming now due to this COVID-19 pandemic. So we will ask ourselves the questions: what are the consequences of the major transformation taking place in art institutions as a result of the ongoing public health crisis? Without further ado, let me introduce our speakers tonight. Manuela Ciotti is professor of the social and cultural anthropology of the Global South at the University of Vienna in Austria. As a NIAS fellow, she is working on an ethnography of the global spread of modern and contemporary art from India, drawing on extensive research and observations on the developments within the global art world as a result of the pandemic. Ciotti will reflect on how this art world has transformed over the past year. Premjish Achari is a curator and art critic based in Delhi, India. Achari has initiated an independent curatorial platform called Future Collaborations, which aims at theoretically and politically informed curation. He is co-curator of the Bhubaneswar Art Trail 2018, and he's currently heading the program and editorial for the exhibition Lokame Taravadu, I hope I pronounce it right, organized by the Kochi Biennale Foundation. He also teaches art and theory at the Shiv Nadar University. Then finally, but not least, Bronwyn Lace. She is a visual artist living and working in South Africa and currently based in Austria. She works primarily in site-specific installation, sculpture, and performance. Lace is currently co-editor of the Center of for the Less Good Idea, which is an interdisciplinary space for the arts based in Johannesburg, South Africa. And during the lockdown, she curated the Long Minute, about which I am quite sure she will tell more in her response. So we will start with a presentation by Manuela, and then after this, Premjish and Bronwyn will respond to what her ideas and thoughts are, and we will continue with a panel discussion. And I would like to invite you all to actively join the discussion and don't hesitate to ask any questions via the Q&A. And if you are watching from YouTube, you can also ask questions in the chat and we will try to respond to most of them. Then, Manuela, I would like to give you the stage. So please share your screen.
Thank you. Great. Is that visible? Okay, that's great. Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here digitally and share my thoughts with you. I would like to thank Denias, Zara Kars, and Sport25 for organizing and hosting this talk, and Bronwyn Lace and Premjish Achari for joining as panel discussants, and of course, all of you here. I would like to start by saying that pandemic times present us with different scenarios. Within some countries in Europe and in the US, societies and within them art institutions are reopening. Some of these institutions, if not all, have a global outlook and presence. And so we might think that the art world is reopening. These countries are also those with some of the highest concentration of vaccine supplies. However, outside them, conditions are very uneven, and pandemic waves are still unleashing a great deal of death and suffering. In 2020, COVID-19 caused art institutions globally to relocate events and activities to online spaces and social media, or postpone those for which physical presence was deemed essential. Art institutions began to deploy interactive and immersive digital media to remain in touch with their audiences. The pandemic has fast-forwarded a process of digitalization that might have taken years to materialize. Over a year on, the pandemic has been a learning experience on how to expand existing resources and create new ones. Let me mention two examples from both for-profit and non-profit art institutions. Art Basel Hong Kong has just held the first physical art fair since 2019 as a result of the pandemic. On this occasion, the company launched Art Basel Live, described by them, and I quote from them, an ambitious digital offering designed to amplify Art Basel Hong Kong 2021 and bring the excitement and vibrancy of the in-person show to audiences worldwide, unquote. This shows how the in-person experience is still deemed as central. At the same time, the in-person experience at the physical fair this year was regulated by 33 admissions rules, regulations, and measures. Here we have the proof of the birth of a new hybrid infrastructure where both the physical and digital dimension will compete for our attention. In India, the 2020 edition of the Kochi Musiris Biennale held in Kerala was postponed to 2021. Over the years, this Biennale has taken place as a physical event with a rich digital presence. However, the Biennale owes much of its success to its physical locations and its venues that provide visitors with an in-depth and sensorial experience of the artworks on display. And here you can see the main Biennale venue. The Kochi Musiris Biennale has exhibited artists from all over the world and attracted both local and global audiences. The latter, however, cannot travel to India at the moment. After the Biennale postponement, the Student Biennale, that is a regular occurrence within the main event, was held digitally. And a physical art exhibition entitled The World is One Family was held in a location nearby Kochi to uplift spirits during these dark times, as the website recites. And local audiences are the only ones, of course, they can visit. And Premjish Achari, our panelist, has been directly involved in the curation of this wonderful exhibition. So I'm looking forward to hearing his reflections on this. My talk today builds on this diverse and shifting landscape to understand some of the key changes that have emerged since 2020 as a result of the ongoing public health crisis. And this talk builds on three elements. The first concerns history. This is not the first time that a pandemic has left a deep mark on art. This has happened with past pandemics, most notably with the Black Death in the 14th century as a result of its devastating effects and the apocalyptic visions that it has engendered. Closer to our era, in the 20th century, the HIV/AIDS pandemic has triggered art activism at the several different locations that have been heavily affected by it. The second element is physicality. The art world has fundamentally existed as a physical space where to experience art and hold events. Most of the existing scholarship and our knowledge is informed by this physical phenomena. Most, if not all of us, have been part of the large crowds of people visiting museums, biennales, and other spaces to view artworks in person. We also know that a great deal of the works that we find at these institutions are almost always already available in digital reproduction. Despite this, we still want to be in presence of the real thing, that is the work of art. And many of our experiences at these institutions are social ones. We go with people, we are in the midst of people, we talk to people about what we view. The third element consists of inequality. The pandemic has had an impact on an already deeply unequal art world. Some of the existing inequalities among its institutions and professionals might have just been reinforced during the pandemic. For example, not everybody was able to provide digital content when the pandemic hit us. The pandemic has impacted different actors in this world. For example, art school students and recent graduates might have experienced less artist opportunities. Or think about nonprofit spaces very often offering participatory art practices based on physical social engagement that really became impossible during a lockdown. The examples that I bring up today largely refer to actors that have had the resources to experiment and launch new digital physical infrastructure, and hence they are more visible and at times spectacular. But to understand the impact of COVID-19 and how our experience of art will change, we need to go back to the onset of the crisis, to the beginning of the pandemic. The art world was little prepared for this. But why was the art world unprepared or little prepared? Didn't we have digital tools already there? Weren't artists already producing digital art? Wasn't art already being sold online? Didn't museums have accessible digital collections? Weren't art world actors already extensively using websites and social media? The answer to all of these questions is simply yes. But this was just not enough, because much of these practices revolved around the ever-present possibility of physical presence. So what will our experience of art be like after the pandemic? It will definitely be shaped by new infrastructure and our relearning of both the digital and physical dimensions of art. When the pandemic halted the hundreds of art fairs that take place all year round, in their place, online market portals began mimicking real fairs with online viewing rooms. Since then, among many realizations, art market institutions have learned that social media make for great art sales channels. Here we have a deeper connection between art and technology. So art market institutions are experimenting, for example, with Instagram, and in particular, the in-app program of augmented reality filters. It's not only digital infrastructure that is being created. But also physical one. The art fair called Art Dubai has set up a purpose-built structure to host its 2021 edition and ensure COVID-19 safety protocols. This is a completely new environment for art. However, our experience of art is never about an individual artwork, but it is also about this artwork being embedded within a space and within a structure. How many times have we entered a museum or another institution and we've been overwhelmed with emotions besides the presence of artworks? During the pandemic, we not only have experienced the sudden and complete loss of physical interaction with art, but also the loss of being inside art institutions. This picture is from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York and has really made the rounds. Here there's a visitor who's finally back to the museum when it reopened in the city in 2020. On the other hand, separation from the work of art is simply not like separation from any other object. Studies in cognitive science and art history point to the fact that artworks might well be perceived as human agents. Here we have Rembrandt's The Night Watch at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, surrounded by an admiring crowd. In 2017, the 10th million visitor to the museum was awarded a night with the Night Watch. Why would this award consist of spending the night with the painting alone, such an intimate experience like being with a special lover, if being in presence of the work wouldn't be considered a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? The Mauritshuis in The Hague is now the first museum in the world to have been fully digitized in gigapixel format. That is, we can view digital reproductions in ultra-high definition. The museum will soon reopen with an exhibition titled Fleeting, Sense in Color. The website tells us that the exhibition, and I quote from them, explores the portrayal of smell and odor in 17th century art, and one can literally smell the 17th century. But how? By standing in front of a painting and using COVID-safe dispensers, like the one you see in the image. But bear in mind, the dispensers can provide you with fragrant smells, but also with that of a foul 17th century canal. And for those who can't wait for the museum to reopen in June, the Mauritshuis has come up with a special offer. A digital visitor can purchase a unique fragrance box and virtual see and smell tour. So while watching the exhibition tour, you can use the special scent pumps in the box. Where these experiments put to test the frontiers of digital and physical experience of art, I would also like to draw upon the experience of an artist of Indian origins based in New York, Chitra Ganesh. She's known, among other things, for her portrayals of feminist and queer creatures from India's mythology, and she uses very different mediums. In a recent interview, she has suggested that, and I quote from the interview, "No online image will do justice to the materials," unquote, pointing to the delicate drawings on paper hanging in her studio that we can see here. So how do we capture color, materials, texture, light and shadows, emotions, smells of the artworks rendered in many different mediums? During the pandemic in 2020, Bronwyn curated the Long Minute series of online videos that were shared on the social media platforms of the Center for the Less Good Idea based in Johannesburg. From the center's website, I learned that, quote, "The Long Minute was the center's direct response to the removal of our ability to physically be with one another," unquote. Each Long Minute video is totally addictive. It would be wonderful to hear from Bronwyn how she's navigated the artist's creativity and needs to be in presence of the artworks and their environments. And I would like to share some concluding remarks now. The novel infrastructure and modalities of creating and displaying art illuminate the attempts of the art world to stay safe, convey the pandemic imagination, and carve out new creative futures. However, what will emerge from the encounter between the digital and physical infrastructure that the art world now offers and us as an audience will not only depend on this world's resources. The digital and physical experience of art as we know it is no longer with us. We will have to learn these dimensions anew. This process will be profoundly shaped by our gender, class, caste, race, religion, and location. So there's no single answer to what our experience of art will be like in the future. but I look forward to exploring the many answers produced in the process as one of the most exciting forces animating the art world of the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manuela, for this wonderful talk. I would like to invite both Premjish and Bronwyn to start their videos. And then Premjish will first respond to Manuela, and then Bronwyn will follow.
Thank you, Zara. Thank you, Manuela. And also, I would like to use this opportunity to thank NIAS and also SPOUT25 for hosting this very important discussion. And I think amidst all the jubilations and all the kind of optimism about how pandemic is revolutionizing, which is also a very radical term, revolutionizing the art world and also the art institutions, I think it is important to be cautious, take a back seat and think about these issues very carefully. Especially, I feel the virtual turn which is happening and so much enthusiasm about the online, the virtual. Let me start sharing my screen and I'll delve more deeper into it and also share my experience in being part of two exhibitions, actually. One which you have seen in Manuela's presentation. The other one is the Delhi Contemporary Art Week. I will also briefly talk about that too. So if you ask me what is the experience of art in the pandemic, I'll say it is fatigue. It is total fatigue, boredom, uncertainty. And this is a picture which Bhavna Kakkar, the editor of Take On Art magazine, and also a gallerist, Latitude 28 gallerist, has taken during the Delhi Contemporary Art Week, where a boy is tired of all the kind of gallery visit and all, and in the midst of the gallery, he is like tired and sitting there. Yes, there is fatigue, which is plaguing us right now. But what is happening right now in Delhi is also something all of you should know. There is a massive demolition which is going on in the capital state of India, and also this is the one of the most important parts of New Delhi, which houses a lot of important cultural institutions and also government institutions. But it is very well known for these institutions: the National Museum of India, the Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, and the National Archives Annex. And the government they are going ahead with the complete demolition of these buildings, and without any sort of revelation and giving an accountability about what is going to happen with the artworks, art materials, and archival materials which are housed in these institutions. So at the outset, let me begin by stating that the cultural impact of the COVID pandemic is still uncertain as of now. At a time, we are not sure how life will unfold, and we will experience it after we emerge out of our isolation and social distance. It is still difficult for us to kind of chart out a path to understand what will be the cultural impact of the pandemic. And even though there is a claim that pandemic is revolutionizing the art world through the use of technology, and also the digitization is making it more accessible, it is important for us to ask what kind of art is made accessible, for whom it is made accessible, and what are the technologies that are used to make this accessible. And there is no doubt that pandemic will change the way we experience art. But we need to think whether this shift or break is the sole outcome of this pandemic, or whether the shifts were already initiated before the pandemic, or these questions were raised before the pandemic. Questions of online, offline, or hybrid future has to be framed very carefully And I think we need to accommodate spaces for many futures. At a time, we are also facing an onslaught on the art and cultural repositories of this country. I'm talking about India, as I showed you the image. So the long-term impact of these shifts are very grave. And it is also time to discuss about these. What is going to happen to these repositories? I will share my experience with the two projects which I'm part of. As currently, I'm part of this one, Logame Taravar, which is translated as "The World is One Family," curated by Bose Krishnamachari. It's a global survey exhibition of artists from Kerala, which features almost 260 artists in 5 different venues of Alapura and Cochin. And I think it is one of the largest exhibitions to happen in South Asia at the moment, especially during this, after the first the wave of pandemic. And these are massive physical spaces that are transformed for the exhibition. And these are also heritage sites. Some of them are warehouses, some of them are coir factories. So these are going to be converted into museums with the help of the state government once this contemporary art exhibition is over. So it is a physical experience, as you can see, and it is very important that you are in this physical space to see contemporary art in a heritage site. And this project has also been caught up in a lot of postponements and delays because of the COVID and also the recent state election which happened in Kerala. And as a result of that, there were a lot of bureaucratic hurdles we had to kind of face. And also because of the return of the second wave, the plans are still affected to, especially the visitors, allowing the visitors and also to continue, also to host the programs as part of this. So the exhibition initially was opened, allowing 75 restricted number of visitors per day, but later on that also changed, and they said that not everyone can visit. Only those who can produce a negative test can enter the venue, or those who have taken 2 doses of the vaccine can enter. But the exhibition is also is facing a lot of criticism from a certain sort of community, a skeptical community who are asking that why so much of money is spent on art at a time of pandemic. And I don't know how to respond to that. Why not is the question. But eventually, after the lockdown was declared, now it is temporarily closed for the visitors. And all the programs which I had to curate physically, I was thinking of planning a hybrid model, both offline and in the site, and also online programs. This is the early part of the exhibition making. So this is how the sites were looking. Now all the programs have shifted online as of now. So when you ask me about the programs that have shifted online, I will say that it allows the possibility for a larger participation. People from outside Kerala can attend the talks, they can be a part of the talks. You don't have to fly them in at a riskier time like this. But also it hinders the possibility to hold conversations in the site, especially such an important exhibition at the site. So these are some of the discussions which I have curated. These are continuing, and the next one will be on art pedagogy in Kerala, day after tomorrow. But I was also part of, like briefly, of the Delhi Contemporary Art Week in Bikaner House, which was also a physical exhibition. And some of the programs which were associated with this exhibition happened both offline and online. But even though it is called as Delhi Contemporary Art Week, it had a very good representation of South Asian art, South Asian contemporary art from Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan. And it also had to gradually shut down due to the severity of the second wave in Delhi. But there were also a lot of activities which they hosted during this particular exhibition. That is me and some of the members who are part of the Pecha Kucha of this. Under exhibition, these are the posters of the online talk, and this is the offline Pecha Kucha, which we had done. Quickly, I would also like to talk about In Touch, which is an online exhibition conducted by the 10 galleries from India and Dubai. But I want to focus about the experience which these In Touch platform offers, which is, even though it's called as a virtual exhibition, I think it is just producing a viewing room where you can see the work. So it is not an immersive experience or anything like that. It is just work flattened out for an online audience to see how it will look in their living room or in their bedroom or whatever. So the shift that I see in South Asian art ecology is largely related to using online platform to conveniently sell the artworks. And this has not diversified the nature of artwork. So you will not see digital artworks in a digital exhibition or an online exhibition. Mostly you will see paintings and sculptures in an online exhibition. So it has not included digital and online practices in these exhibitions. But what I would also like to talk about is the arrival of this particular organization, Superblue, and the virtual space they are creating in Miami. So we have to understand that art exhibition is an ecosystem that comprises of art institutions, art, artists, and physical space. And with the advent of online exhibitions, there's a greater chance to access art anytime and from any space. But what are you accessing? In the previous case, you saw you're accessing a flattened image, a flattened version of an object. Can we call this a virtual exhibition if we consider the principles and characteristics of new media and internet? Are they immersive? Are they hypertextual? Are they interactive? These are some of the characteristics and principles of the new media and the internet. I propose that we can only call a project as online exhibition if it fulfills these criteria. Otherwise, it is digitized version of the physical exhibition or a physical object. So comes the next question, do we have to create more shared experiences or physical artworks in the future? And attempts to create immersive experiences using art and collaborations already were initiated before the pandemic by Superblue. And this is one such platform. They also provide a new model to access these immersive experiences. And these experiences are ticketed and they are recreated, and the artists are paid loyalty and a share of the income based on the ticket sales. According to Chantel Rodriguez, director of Superblue Miami, and I quote him, "Together, these artists challenge the limitations of conventional art and expand the traditional ways of experiencing art to a more accessible and engaging environment that appeals to new audiences." So this is the description about Superblue. These are the prices which you can see on the right side. So they are expensive because the projects are also really expensive and the artists have to be paid upfront for this. So these are some of the immersive experiences by Team Lab, which is a Japanese-based collaboration, and they call themselves as, I think, ultra technologists. That's what they call themselves as. So as you can see, it spectacularizes art and overwhelms the viewer with immersion and a lofty scale. So whether it will thrive or not is something we need to discuss separately. But at a time when art fraternity has suffered a huge economic setback, we will witness the advent of various such models in the coming days. If we also look back at the AIDS crisis, I think Manuel also briefly mentioned that, especially in the US, it had played a very important role in how art addressed illness, body, production of artworks, and display, and how art is exhibited. And if you remember, many artists work closely with activists, researchers, educators, etc., collaboratively to foreground the crisis, but also accommodated various art practices and strategies to critique the US government and how they were handling the AIDS pandemic. So as of now, we do not have such profound practices that are reflecting on the long-term impacts of social isolation, pandemic vis-a-vis body, and technologies of surveillance. and also the social experience. COVID-19 has pushed us to imagine new ways to show existing practices and exhibition making. But it has not pushed us enough to imagine newer practices and paradigm shifts. So there is an attempt to bring artworks and museums to your home. But can the museum actually repatriate the artworks to its original homes, is my question. Even digitally, the museums are still the custodians of these experience makings, and we need to reclaim agency in this experience making. Instead of being gatekeepers, will museums and art world allow audiences to be the agents of cultural production? And how could we enable participation and collaboration in this renewed context? This is the last question I posed today. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Premjish. I think we'll immediately go on to Bronwyn, and I already saw Manuela nodding a few times, so I think she has lots to say. But before we continue with the panel discussion, Bronwyn, you're up.
There you go. Thank you, Zara. Thank you, Premjesh and Manuela for that. It's fascinating to be living and thinking and trying to make sense of all of these things as they are happening to us. And, you know, thanks to Manuela for sharing and inviting me to speak about the long minute. It really was such a simple impulse in the beginning. It was a conversation between William Kentridge, who is the founder of the Center for the Less Good Idea, where I am director, and who, of course, is also an artist who has enjoyed an astonishing international career. We were having a conversation at the announcement of the first lockdown in Johannesburg, and we were speaking about the next 21 days. At that point, we had understood from government that that's what all it would be sort of devastating to our artists, to the collaborators who work collectively across disciplines, but in a very performative way at the space in Johannesburg, because they are a community of artists who respond and generate new work and thinking, test ideas, and incubate new artworks together in a very physical, felt, embodied way. And so this first lockdown happened to come as we were about to open what had been 6 months of intensive process to an audience. And of course, like everybody else in the world who were in these processes and who had the capacity, we translated about a third of what we had been generating towards the season into video filmed performances. And during that time, had this impulse to stay in touch, not only with those who were directly at the center at that time working towards the season, but with a kind of broader community of artists from their isolated spaces. So we sent out a very simple mailer, initially just to our network to say, what's happening in your minds, your journals, your homes, your bodies, and what would it look like to frame it in the context of a minute, thinking about Instagram effectively as your stage, as the holding space and the framer for what that is. So it's a square, it's a minute, and what does it look like for you to share that with us? And the first, after the dialogue between William and myself and the kind of naming of the long minute, because we were immediately aware of this kind of sense of temporality and our sense of time being sort of warped and drawn, and watching these real world events unfold around us from our locked down and isolated spaces. So what I'm going to do is share with you the first long minute that William made in response to the question of what is happening in your lives, your homes, your minds, your journals. And so William opened up his journal where he writes and makes notes on a daily basis and translated it into this. And we put that out on Instagram, on our channel, alongside some text that invited others to share a minute of their work, a minute of their thinking, a minute of how they were processing what was happening. And in due course, started to receive from our immediate community minutes of somebody dancing at their kitchen counter, to drawings that were being made, animated moments in studio, the clouds that they were watching from their backyard, reworking of bodies of work and that existed, and a revisiting to look at it in the context of just a minute and a sharing. And it became this kind of enormously interesting portrait of what was happening on an emotional, psychological, philosophical, societal level as we were all pushed into the measures and conditions that the pandemic has enforced. Also, what was fascinating is that quite quickly, I was not only receiving minutes from South African artists who I knew and worked with, but I was receiving minutes from artists across the world. And I was also receiving minutes of dance, for example, with a request for, do you have a composer that I might work with? And so suddenly I was introducing a Portuguese dancer to a Mozambican composer who wouldn't normally have perhaps found one another for something that was very simple. It's only 30 seconds. The next surprise in this daily sharing was that we were going well beyond the 21 days, not only because the lockdown in South Africa was extended and was, in fact, last year, one of the longest lockdowns that any country faced. I think it got to something like 121 days of a very hard lockdown. But that I received a ping on my phone on the back end of Instagram Messenger from a curator and the director of an institute, a museum of very high regard called Kunsthaus Bregenz, which sits in Austria, but really on the border of Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. And he had been following this long minute on his own news thread on Instagram and had a question about whether I thought it might be interesting to translate it into a real world exhibition for the Kunsthaus, who would be opening up after the first wave in Europe in June. And so, of course, I responded very positively and enthusiastically. I had the good fortune of actually being in Vienna at the time, and so was able to travel to Bregenz and put the exhibition on. And so suddenly these fragments, these moments from the lives of artists across the world, these unresolved, uncommodifiable fragments at the edge of the art world were invited into a major institution and placed there for large audiences to see over many months. And it was very interesting to see how they held their ground in this environment. And I think how they challenged what it is that the Contemporary Art Museum does for us as artists. It refocused, for me at least, what art is about and who makes it, and really the individuals involved in their constant process and pursuit of understanding in the way that they experience the world, and then in the way that they translate and project that back into the world for each other and others to see and make sense of. So that was the first very interesting journey for the Long Minute. And in the end, I shared around 120 minutes. And we began to extend the Long Minute into commissioned miniature artworks that we've called the Considered 3 Minutes, where the center is now looking at what it is to make miniature artworks in the form of film for this kind of context. The other project that I wanted to share with you that came out of this process at the center, where I was witnessing also these beautiful collaborations between people over a kind of dialogue that happens via the phone and the internet and spaces like this, Zoom conversations, was the Highway Notice Project. And really recognizing that in the physical world, we were being muted as artists. There was no space for us to go to experience work. So audiences were hungry, and artists' voices and experiences of what was happening was equally muted. And so it occurred to us at the Center for the Less Good Idea that we might occupy some billboards on the major highways of Johannesburg's inner city, and a space that has thousands and thousands of cars traveling through it and across it throughout the day and the night. And so over the last 6 months, we curated artwork by poets in combination with visual artists in a collaborative way. And this is just a kind of nearly 3 minute where I'm going to end off showing of what that was about and the ways in which the poets, the writers, and the artists reflected on the particular conditions and the particular effects of the pandemic, but also what has existed always in the context of Johannesburg and even globally, and has simply been heightened into awareness by the pandemic. So for us, this is both a very physical presence on the highways and for the city of Johannesburg. But of course, the making of and the showing of, we also translate into these artworks. So the project, I commissioned Bongile Zulu, who's a poet and a vocalist, to take the words that were created by the 12 artists involved here and to create a sound piece out of them, which you will hear in her voice.
Breathe into the corner of every way. Allow the crisis of erasure and singed paper trails. Breathe via the darkness, the shadow of light. Breathe. If a career jumpstart was a person, The very important people are blown out, extinguished by gusts of truth. Dipendule, bualiene, libone, talk to them all. Speak gentle, speak kind, breathe, weigh all tears upon the delicate tips of thorns that have grated all tenderness. Feed your sons the same softness you feed your daughters. Black girl, live. Black girl, live. Black girl, stand alive. Every 3 hours, one of us doesn't make it. Breathe. The gagging, ever jobless young. The shaft that injects my blood into the and sucks out the golden ore of burdened souls, saddled with ashes of sage. Breathe, and healing will come for us too.
Thank you. Wow, that was beautiful. That was fantastic. I think I have many questions, but I can imagine that Manuela, you would like to briefly respond to what you've heard from Premjish and Bronwyn.
Yes.
And before, I'm sorry, if there are any questions from the audience, please join the conversation.
Yes, thanks both of you. This was just amazing. And in a way, I'm in this kind of, you push me into this celebratory mode against my will, in the sense that, looking at these poetic works and this, amazing exhibitions with all the challenges that you had to go through, leads me to say, God, this is, this is wonderful, fantastic. But I think that I won't say that because there's too much going on and too much suffering, in the world. But I follow very closely both the situation in South Africa and in India already since last year, in terms of how the pandemic was unfolding, and the very harsh lockdowns, violence, repressive regimes. So we know what kind of context we are, talking about, till the latest, developments that Premjish has sketched, for us. I think that my sort of what I was trying to hint to, towards the end of my talk, is this sort of implicit desire for intimacy, and to really return to, the poetic dimensions that we can experience. We did experience the poetic dimension of these works when, Bronwyn has shared these works with us. But also, the intimacy of being in the presence of an artwork, whatever that is, and really be able to appreciate, the materials, really, the light coming in, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the things that I've already mentioned. So for me, this only kind of reinforces, the need for intimacy, but also the fact that it can come from many different ways. And one of the ways is obviously digital. And another thing that I wanted to say is this deluge of creativity that we've witnessed too. I mean, Bronwyn has, reached out to people, and you were flooded by interventions, and Premjesh has put together an enormous exhibition of works that were probably also produced at this time. And on social media, all I could see was people sharing their work, whether it was pandemic induced or previous work. It didn't really matter, but it was this kind of deluge. Of course, in search for visibility, a lot of people were trying to sell their work with this really interesting and important, initiative called Artist Support Pledge, on Instagram. And so, these are really forces that we need to reckon with. But what I want to say is that we don't need to do it today. I want to take time. I want to take time, patience, and to look at this poetry, to look at these images, whether like it's artworks in digital format or artworks seen in a gallery or a museum. But I think that time, intimacy, and poetry are the things that I'm not willing to kind of, give up just because there's yet another infrastructure that is, allowing us, yes, to share, a lot of, ideas and works, and, and people coming, being in touch, that, Bronwyn, you said, someone from 2 different countries that would never have come together. But at the same time, I want to keep, the kind of my desire kind of alive for, the time that we really are able to go back to, institutions and relearn, how to look at artworks, and also relearn how to look at this digital / augmented reality / digital infrastructure / a lot of other things. And so that's really what I wanted to say, but I just didn't have the time. But a lot of these thoughts have actually really been have really given really been born by the kind of experiences that you great experience that you share. And so thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Manuela. Well, you immediately mentioned something that, or sort of referred to a question that I actually had about, in your talk, Manuela, you mentioned that art is always embedded within a structure, and it's always a social experience. Am I right that you are now referring to that as well as your wish to go back to art as we used to know it?
This will be impossible, of course. We will never go back to that, but I will want to go back to, these venues, sites, look at works. Of course, with all of this experience that, really, of this past 1 year, that seems the experience of a century. I'm looking at documents from last year, asking questions about the art world or other questions, universal questions, and they almost seem kind of already passé because, we are living in accelerated times. And so I also want to pull the brake a little bit, on this. And again, pause and, look at works and look at poetry, look at the details, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't, I think that time is also a very important component of this time, of these pandemic times. And so, yes, I look forward to have the experiences of art back in many different formats and, see what happens.
Yeah, I can imagine. There is a question from the audience via YouTube, and I think you've all touched upon it sort of, but I'm curious what you think. Someone is asking, do you see the new practices that developed during the pandemic as a way or opportunity to democratize art? Premjesh, would you like to respond to this question?
Yeah, thank you. To begin with, I'm very wary of the term democratizing, because sometimes I feel that democratization is arriving at a consensus to settle for a lesser evil. And even in the, I think in the art practices that claim, for example, and there is a lot we find in the social practice, in the realm of social practice and community practices that claim to kind of democratize the art experience and go out to the public, and with this benevolent, morally high ground to democratize art. But for me, more than what kind of practices are created, it is definitely important. But for me, the important question would be what kind of intentions are behind these, and what kind of community are you arriving at? What kind of community and public are you imagining when you are saying that you want to democratize the art? And for example, even in the Indian context, like everywhere else, we also had the Me Too moment in India a few years back. And it was a very, what do you call, very passionate, very sensitive moment. And a lot of us who were part of it, who were signatories, who were supporters of the survivors and everything. But my critique of that movement is also that it could not engender newer equal structures or newer safe structures. It fizzled out. It could not capitalize itself as an institutional critique in India. It could have been India's institutional critique, but it could not, because what happens is that these movements tend to be concentrated on as part of certain groups or certain cliques who have like what you call there is a certain sort of privileged understanding of politics, and it does not permeate and take into consideration the politics or the experience of the oppressed, and it doesn't communicate with that. And this is the problem, as I said earlier, with the social practice or all these attempts which claim to democratize, because it does not problematize democracy, first of all. It does not problematize the existing ideas of public and community that exist with us.
Yeah.
So I don't know, and for me, always I give this example that new practices are not always radical. When the director who made Triumph of Will for Hitler, at that time, movie making was also, documentary making of that kind of scale was also new. But new always doesn't mean that it is radically progressive or anything like that. So we have to be cautious.
Yeah, I'm curious now in that sense how you look at the long minutes that Bronwyn curated. I can imagine that in a sense these worked as a sort of democratizing art forms.
My only the sense, like Manuela said, and whatever we saw, the video we saw was really powerful. It was very inspiring and very touching, and the messages which were displayed actually were very provocative. They were not sugar-coated messages. They were very provocative messages, and I feel, and that is why I would not like to call them democratic, because democracy has this kind of sugar-coating effect on things. And what we saw in the video was not sugar-coated. It was presenting harsh realities on your face in a larger scale. So that is what we saw in those videos. And I really liked the loud voice, the loud sound, which was also there in the background, lamenting, but also shouting. And also it was like a wake-up call to all of us. For me, what I would think about the 1 minute project, one long minute project, is that I would still hesitate to give it a name, maybe video art or art project or anything at this stage. Rather, I would see it as a repository of experiences of our time. I would not call it as anything new or something innovative or anything. It could be all that. But I would like to, first of all, experience all this, what has happened, what people have sent, why they have sent it, And what was Bronwyn's idea of collecting all these things? I would like to know all that before arriving at a conclusion.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I think that a repository of experiences is what is most significant about the experience of receiving and curating and sharing these moments from artists. And I think that you know, what gets forgotten, a lot of what's been spoken about in relation to what the art world will be post-pandemic is what will happen to the institution. And the concern and the crisis sits with the museum or the theatre or the festival, the platforms that hold the arts. But I feel that the artist is not given enough attention, and that without the artists, these spaces are empty buildings. That's what we've seen, right there. And their collapse is not collapsing artistic process or the fact that artists are constantly working. And working from wherever they can. I think the long minute for me was such evidence of that. What was most devastating in the lockdowns was the lack of capacity to also physically be with one another, particularly for work that is performative. And I think that, you know, at the center and as an individual, speaking on behalf of the center and on behalf of myself, I would never say that I think that the digital world, the virtual world, that is providing some solutions for us, some alternatives, is more exciting or is going to replace the physical. I believe wholeheartedly in the embodied. And what's at the same time, I think that the object, as the art object, has been thrown, and this is pre-pandemic, into sort of an understanding of what constitutes an object and physicality, and so just last week, and I have not wrapped my head around this, but we were approached and asked by a tech company whether we would be interested in translating some of the long minutes into blockchain NFTs for auction. And so suddenly these things that we never imagined as permanent or commodifiable have this kind of question. And the reason I have not wrapped my head around it is because I don't know what happens to them, what happens to this repository of moments when we start to apply the same art world rules, the old art world rules to them. And I fear that the Center for the Less Good Idea was created out of a deep understanding that, at least in the context of Johannesburg, the many platforms and institutions and bodies that exist to support and hold the arts don't do it. There is where artists are unheld and in fact are easily abused in the context of what is a kind of logic of profit and loss.
Beautifully said. Yeah, I think there are two more questions from the audience that I would like to raise, as we are almost running out of time already. And I think I'll start with the shortest one. This is one from Cesar Majorana. And Cesar asks, how long will the influx of work situated about or around COVID seem interesting to us? What do you guys think? Does anyone want to respond to this? Manuela?
Yes, very briefly. I think that, again, I long for the longue durée, you know, to actually sort of to have, you know, well, number one, I hope that, you know, the pandemic is over soon all over the world. And then, you know, when things settle, we can sort of take stock of what has actually happened. And if I think, for example, about, you know, past pandemics, you know, we had pandemics like the Black Death, you know, that kind of, I mean, the plague kept on coming back for centuries. And so works were produced, you know, over centuries. So we are really talking about this really stretched amount of times. And I mean, of course, I don't want to go back to the Middle Ages or, you know, eras, you know, epochs after that. But I think that, you know, nobody could predict the influx of these works. Nobody, some artists didn't produce anything during this time. Let's also talk, well, not talk about that because we don't have time, but I mean, you know, we also have people who did not do much. And so, you know, maybe the COVID imagination was something that really blocked their, you know, their poetry, their own imagination, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So again, this invitation not to look at the spectacular, well, we have to look at the spectacular anyway, because it's part of our world, or the hyper visible, or the ultra super high resolution. And so, you know, I don't really know how long people will continue to produce, you know, these works for, but, you know, they will continue. I mean, you know, there's so many artists around the world. And so people will continue to produce, to be inspired, you know, by the pandemic. And so it's really impossible to predict. But again, you know, we don't have right now these centuries or decades, you know, ahead of us. I mean, we haven't really lived through this, thank God, you know, for decades. And so that we can really look at what's actually happened, you know, to creativity, for example. So the answer is, I don't know, but yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Premjis, do you have an answer to this?
Quickly, yeah. Like I'll quote Susan Sontag here, who also wrote during the AIDS crisis. She writes that illness comes to stand for the fears of the day. And during the AIDS crisis, it stood for homosexuality, queer groups, the fear which surrounded mainly. And even in our times, COVID represents a certain sort of racist fear, as we all know, about its origins, about weird food patterns and all the kind of stereotypical imaginations which we circulate. But like Manuela said, if you look at the cultural impact of pandemics throughout history, starting from the bubonic plague, Spanish flu, AIDS epidemic and all, it has its relevance even now, the images. Even we keep on referring to them, we keep on going back to them. And why is that? Is maybe because we prefer illness as metaphors, because the physically sick body is very distressing, is confining, and it is antithetical to what we are, because we have a rigorous and unbound imaginative mind. And I think these two antitheses, this confined sick body versus the rigorous creative mind, I think that exists throughout human civilization, and it will go on to exist. Until that exists, I think the artworks produced on pandemics will keep on fascinating us.
True that. I think as we have a few minutes left in this talk, I want to ask you all to think about or explain maybe what you think is the most important lesson to bring along for the coming next years, considering that there's not one solution, but what do you think is the most important lesson to bring along for the listeners joining this talk? I would like to ask all of you to respond to this.
Wow. maybe just two words, if I can say. Of course, I mean, this question comes from very different positionalities. And so I'm not an artist, I'm not a curator, I'm not a museum director. So as someone who actually studies this phenomena, right? And so I can only speak, you know, from this standpoint. And one thing that I wanted to say actually concerning the previous conversation, you know, about the long minute and about, you know, democratizing art, etc. I was actually really taken by the aesthetics. And so, sorry, but you know, I'm really I'm still one of those that doesn't want to lose sight of the aesthetic dimension of what I experience. And of course, totally subjective. So, but you know, I watched all the other long minutes. And that's why I said it's totally addictive. I mean, and so, yes, don't lose sight of the aesthetics. At least this would be you know, crucial for me. Again, I'm not someone who's, you know, whose kind of future depends on, you know, the function of one institution or the other. And so in this respect, you know, I can only speak from my own, you know, standpoint, but really, for me, aesthetics still has, you know, a huge value. So thank you.
Thank you. Bronwyn, what do you think?
I think, sorry, the question was,
what's the most important lesson you think that we should bring along for the next couple of years if we think about the transformation that the art world is going through?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the dialogue and the conversation and the networked collective musing and making that has been going on, and that has certainly, I think all of us will you know, say that the last year and a half I have suddenly been thrown into conversations with people from every corner of the planet who I wouldn't normally have found myself in a room with, and so there's I think beyond this moment, we need to keep those conversations going and up, and we need to find ways to, you know, I think that there's something to be said for the ease at which we're able to do this. And that hybridity does have a function and does have a purpose. So yeah, I think it's to really encourage the continuation of the conversations that have been sparked by what's been thrown into contrast by the pandemic.
Thank you. Premjish, final words?
Yeah, taking a cue from what Manuela has said, see, representation has been a very important issue in contemporary art. And if you look at the last 10 years, even political scenario, it has been about representation and justice. But I sincerely feel that it won't be enough, and we need to reconfigure. And I think the coming time should be really spent to reconfigure and also reconfigure aesthetics. I think that's going to be a very important task for all of us. We cannot ignore the aesthetics. We will have to reconfigure the aesthetics. And as I said earlier, representation won't be enough. Justice won't be enough. We need to reconfigure and move ahead.
Thank you very much. I think on that note, I'm going to close this NIAS talk. I want to thank you all for participating in this talk, and the listeners for joining us today. Thank you very much for Spui25 for hosting this talk. I think it has been a very fruitful conversation. I am hopeful for the future, and I couldn't agree more that we shouldn't lose sight of the aesthetics and also give our artists enough attention, because what Bronwyn said, without them the buildings are just empty buildings. Thank you very much all. Our next NIAS talk will be on the 21st 1st of June, and we'll look into wondercomers. And before that, I would like to mention that on 9, 10, and 11 June, we are hosting a huge conference on studies of belonging with 3 keynote speakers, with Professors Gloria Wecker, Amin Ghaziani, and Nadim Rouana, who will each, from their own expertise and research fields, look into belonging as a field of study. Thanks again, all.
Thank you.
And, hope to see you soon in real life.
Lovely. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Ciao.
Thank you.